Thank you so much, Aurélie, for this presentation. We have 10 minutes to discuss your presentation, and then 10 to 15 minutes for the general discussion of the whole session. Please.
Thank you very much for a fascinating presentation, very clear. But one thing that comes up often in all kinds of joint interaction is adjustment and correction. If things go wrong along the way, you need to say, no, we're not going that way, we're going this way. And in my experience from military applications of artificial intelligence, that's one of the challenges we have to recall, for instance, a robot that has been sent out or it's going in the wrong direction, or even more concretely these days, the discussion about the Boeing 737 MAX, where, you know, the pilots are trying to interact with the computer, but the computer isn't responding because it's been programmed in a way that doesn't really respond to their response. So they're not speaking the same language. Mm-hmm. Or the final example from a popular culture, I guess, would be 2001: A Space Odyssey, where, you know, Dave cannot turn off HAL 9000 because they don't communicate. So that communication along the way, when things go wrong or things suddenly change, I think that's one of the real challenges of human-AI interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henrik.
Yeah, yes, I agree totally. In fact, that's why also we try to model also in fact the point of view of the robot on the human point of view. So we are trying to get the model the human has about the scene, and also the model the human has about the status of the goal, the model the human has about the status of each of the action. That's why also. But I agree, and there is also alignment, I think, which is very important about that.
Thank you. Aurélie, please.
I was interested in your model, which I think it begins to achieve the last point that I was speaking about, the notion of a representation of self and a representation of some other agent knowledge. I was wondering how far you could go with this. Do you have sort of recursive representation where, for instance, the robot knows that the other person doesn't know that he knows something, which is important in order to interact? For instance, if an object is hidden, you need not only to understand the other person's point of view to understand that it is hidden. I think you have that in your system. Mm-hmm. But do you also have the robot's ability to say, well, I know where it is, so let me show you, or this sort of operations?
Yeah, we've done such thing. We've done this Salian hand stuff, for example. And we've done also stuff with the planning also, saying that, okay, I show some plan there, but at some point perhaps you've got a plan saying that the human should take an object that is reachable for the human, but you can infer that, yes, but the human doesn't know because there is an obstacle. And we can add in the plan an action saying, yes, you must say to the human, where is the object, before asking him to take it, because it doesn't know where is it, stuff like that.
I think you need something like error detection, not just for the self, but also from the other person. Yeah. And in fact, at the brain level, very interesting research has shown that the very same error response arises when I make the error or when I see somebody else make the error, actually. So we have joint systems, much like you are describing, I think.
Okay, it's interesting, thank you.
Armin. Stefano, dopo.
Thank you.
Dopo, no, Stefano, dopo, no. Dopo, Stefano.
You correctly write and talk about joint action. But do you agree that what you said does not apply to common action? Because commonality is different from jointness. As you correctly write, jointness presupposes to coordinate action. For instance, in a factory, a worker and a capitalist, they make a joint action, but not a common action, because commonality postulates that the two or more agents share exactly the same purpose. In the jointness, that is not necessary, because the workers wants to maximize the wage rate, and the capitalist wants to maximize the profit rate. So it seems to me that when you apply to the relations between a human person and a robot, I agree with you that they can do jointness, but not commonality. That is perhaps something very intriguing, perhaps for future research. Do you agree? Yeah.
Any comment? Okay, you agree. Armin, please.
Okay, have you, in your setup of experiments, looked at the human using a display and pointing in order to disambiguate? So human has a display and points for the pick and place situation?
No, we haven't done that.
Including computer vision, because in many applications, I think the human is not directly facing the robot. There may be,
it was really very simple. We do all those things. The example was, sorry, oh, sorry. The example was very simple because I want to explain all that stuff, but we are doing all the stuff also in my lab, but not this one.
Thank you, Aurélie. Now, there could be a general discussion if we want to. Okay, Joachim, please.
I wonder if it's the right point in time to ask a few cross-cutting questions. Let me try to draw attention to the time dimension which we are talking about. Maybe it's prompted by a workshop which we had last month here on the evolution of humankind over the last 7 million years. We talked about hominids and we talk about humanoids now. My point is Homo sapiens, so not 7 million years, but last 300,000, is a playful subject and is interested in curiosity and creativity. The things which we have seen in the examples are probably to be extrapolated in the long run. And Wolf, for instance, you mentioned, we would only come together if we would treat the computer like nurturing children and bring them up like our children. That was one of your comments. I understood it at that time, we will never do that, and so on. But the young man from Japan treats the puppet, which he later married, like a partner. So I wonder, how can we extrapolate from what we see now for the long run? I feel many of our presentations are extremely interesting, defining where we are now in a positive sense, and we had important exchanges on the normative, what we should do and shouldn't do. But my plea for future discussions would be, let's boldly look into the future and build scenarios as frighteningly as they may be for us today. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Joachim.
You're right.
Any reaction on this extrapolation issue? The evolutionary view. Frank, please.
I really, that point resonated with me, Joachim's point, and I think it was one of the reasons why I thought that Lorenzo's presentation was so resonant, was because I think on one level we can say that we can talk about a scientific observation of the robots and and of the AI involved, and to discuss them as lacking certain human abilities, but I think that what's brought up in the other presentations today is the possibility of a coevolution that is posited in a book called Living with Robots by, I think, Duhamel, and I forget the second author. And part of where I think in terms of broadening the conversation we're going is that we could choose to be a society where we want to evolve toward a state of, say, bringing up robots like children or otherwise seeking friendship, seeking other relationships with them. But I think that would, there are many arguments against going in that direction as a culture that I would frame particularly as the worry generated by machines competing for our resources, attention, and affection, and competing and beating out other human beings. And I think that was also a theme of Angela's comment with respect to as children grow up with screens more and more and are less accustomed to humans. So I think in terms of bringing it together even with the Batra presentation, part of our challenge is how to educate individuals to both appreciate the power and affordances of these technology without assuming that the endpoint is some singularitarian evolution of humans into machines.
Thank you. Pierre? Oh, sorry, and then Marcelo.
Yes, just catching the question on the long-term possibilities, I would like to ask a question on this, which is considering the economical aspects of robotics, which have not been very much talked about. When we have a new technology, it could expand to billions of people or not, depending on its cost. We have two extreme examples in that. On one hand, 40 years ago, space discoveries and travel to Mars was considered a solution to Earth's problems. If we destroy the Earth too much, we'll have another implementation, and Mars might be a strategy. Of course, the imbalance between the cost of that and the amount of poor people being concerned made this futuristic view completely inadequate, and today it's essentially forgotten, except from 2 or 3 rich persons who want to travel to space at their own cost. On the other hand, we have the technology of smartphone, which is not very expensive and has reached today probably 3 or 4 billion people. So if robotics has a future which can be more economically decided, then maybe we can assess in the long-term extrapolation how it will deal with poverty on the Earth. Will it be accessible to most of the people and help to solve inequalities, or will it increase inequalities? And of course, the judgment we can place on that would be very different. So, to be brief, shouldn't one consider in extrapolation also the economical aspects of robotics implementation in humanity?
If Marcelo permits, Stefano will answer directly. No. Se Marcelo si permette risponde prima.
That was done on purpose, because this coming October, in this same place, there will be another workshop on the same topic, robotics and artificial intelligence, with specific reference to the economic implications, both on the labor market, displacement of jobs, and on the internal organization of firms, which have to change, because most firms, they still follow the Tayloristic model. Now, these new technologies are making that model of organization obsolete. Third, as Elena was saying, inequality. Now we have evidence, which will produce in the October workshop, that these new technologies have increased in the last 20 years the rate of inequalities among countries and within countries in a manner that is better not to mention because it's scandalous. And so this is a problem. We cannot continue to think of this new, without considering that because of these new technologies, many groups of people are suffering as a consequence of that. And so that will be the three main topics of the workshop in October. You are invited if you so wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcelo, please.
I want to ask to Stefan, to Dan, as I want to ask this morning. The question is, we can have some experiment that the brain have not only conscience, also the animals, no? But something that we call natural law, so a distinct moral conscience, good or bad. We can have some experiment about this, as we have experiment that we can have a conscience and self-conscience. So this is the question, because this, if we can have some experiment about this, maybe we can ask also see robots have or not.
Thank you. Gilles, please.
Oh, sure. Do you want me to answer? Or?
If you want to answer
Sure,
now,
yeah.
yes, okay.
Yeah, so it's one of the different meanings of the word consciousness, which is part of the problem, this moral consciousness. I did not personally work on that, but I know that there is some very nice research, and in particular on the emergence of moral consciousness. And the work of Elisabeth Spelker, for instance, who came here, also other people working very young children, show that extremely early on, in the first year of life, they already have some intuitions about the fact that some people are good and some people are bad. And it can take very small amount of evidence. For instance, a young child sees a video of an adult person pushing a child on the ground, and then when two people approach, this person will be avoided. So the child already knows that there is something wrong with this person. There are many, many such examples, which I think suggest that there is already a strong moral sense. What Elisabeth Spelker was showing is that there is a sense of in-group versus out-group, and this is surprisingly to a large extent determined by language also. So the person who speak my language are like me, they are my friends by default. Person who speak another language tends to be in the other camp. And this is much more important than the color of the skin, for instance, for young children. And by the way, I think this is an important point with respect to what Wolf was saying. You were suggesting, Wolf, that a lot of this is learned. Well, I'm sure there is a lot of learning, but I'm also sure that there is a sort of repertoire right from the start, or really early on in the first few months of life, for this sort of categories that we use throughout our life after that.
Thank you. Gilles, please.
Yeah, I wanted to react on Pierre's question about economy. Maybe you ask us to be bold and to think very far in the future, so this is what I'm going to do. We can go one step further and think that if we have machines, whether they are computers, artificial intelligence, whatever machines, that work for us, our workforce will not be useful anymore. And the current organization of society, which is based on the idea that people who do not have any capital still have a workforce they can sell, these people, they will have nothing to sell, neither capital nor workforce, because nobody will care for their workforce. So it means that our current organization of society is threatened by the development of machines that can build the goods that we need, much more that it has been threatened by communism in the 20th century. I mean, it's much worse, because there is no communism without communists, but there is still this problem even if nobody agrees on any ideology, it's a matter of fact. We don't care about your workforce anymore. And this is a huge shift in the organization of society which is to come. When? Of course, I don't know, and I hope it will be in a long time.
Thank you. Please.
Would like to say about this chatbot and Alexa Amazon and all these vocal machines are very cheap, 50 euros or dollars. And a lot of people in US, for example, have 6 machines like that, one per room. So there will be a clear way to manipulate people with this kind of machine. There is absolutely no regulation. But just I would like to say that the first to react are the Californians, because they begin with a law which is to keep the clear distinction between a living being and a machine. They push this in direction, and there's another point, I think, in the law in California. So we have to take care to look at that too, and maybe to adopt largely this kind of things.
Well, thank you. I was wondering whether Joachim has a reaction to these reactions to his extrapolation issue, or not, anyway.
Let's do that over coffee.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. We deserve the coffee break. See you later.